dots where it says more. You click there to get to the chat, and that will allow you to introduce yourselves, tell us where you're coming from, and share your feedback as we go along. We like to try to have a conversation in 3 dimensions in the chat while we're talking, and to ensure that people are responding to one another on the topics we deal with here. No one is an expert, and all of us are experts. So we are very much eager to hear your opinions in the chat, and we'll talk about ways you can ask questions in just a moment. Okay, I think I'm looking for a green light. If I think what I'll do is while we're waiting, while people are coming in, I'll make my introduction, and that way we won't cut into Marcy into your time at all, I hope. Thank you for joining us today for AI and the Future of Lawmaking. I'm really delighted that we have Marcy Harris here today from the PopFox Foundation. Today's event is part of a longer series of lectures called Rebooting Democracy in the Age of AI. These are conversations that we have with innovative designers, thinkers, technologists, policymakers, and others, thinking about the ways in which we can do democracy differently, the ways that we can not just rescue, but strengthen our democracies globally in the age of AI, using new technology, again, to foster more and better engagement, greater trust in our institutions, and more effective law and policy making. If you would like to sign up for future events coming up, we'll put a link in the chat for how you can sign up for new things coming up. And we have events every month, as well as we have posted there online past events, including lecture videos from both this series and our series on the Internet We Deserve, which focuses on a related set of questions about the Internet and democracy as well. The series is hosted by the Burns Center for Social Change at Northeastern University and the GovLab, in partnership with the Institute for Experiential AI at Northeastern and our colleagues there. Okay, without further ado, lots more people coming in, but let me go ahead, Marcy, and introduce you. I think for many people in this audience, you need no introduction. There's a lot to say about you. We'll put your bio in the chat, but I'll just say Marcy, in addition to being a wonderful friend and colleague, is absolutely one of the leaders in thinking about responsible uses of technology to improve government and benefit humanity. She's a lawyer and former congressional staffer who worked on the House Ways and Means Committee's Affordable Care Act team, and she's held fellowships with Harvard's Kennedy School Ash Center for Democracy and the New America Foundation. She's currently also an adjunct professor at the University of San Francisco, a political science lecturer at San Jose State University, and I might add, has also been faculty in the course that Dan and I taught last semester on AI for Impact, working with our students at Northeastern. Okay, without further ado, Marcy, over to you, and welcome. And we are eager to hear how AI can help save not just democracy, but lawmaking.
Thanks so much, Beth. And hi, everybody. I see lots of friends and mentors coming through on the list. So I am happy to see lots of familiar faces and excited to see some new folks. And hopefully we can engage in the Q&A. I always love this format from the center because it does turn into such a good conversation, usually with lots to learn from all over the world. So I'm excited for that. And I will also say that I just want to humbly address this issue because we are all learning. There is no expert on this particular topic right now. We are all, if not making it up as we go along, certainly learning from each other, finding out that new things are possible, imagining new ways that we can apply these amazing new technologies to the institutions that we are all trying to improve and make work better for the people they serve. So with that, I will share screen. My presentation will be pretty short so that we can jump to conversation, and I look forward to questions. So I will start with a Mid-Journey created image that I think we all are happy to play around with, and just set up the conversation with a concept that that really for me is kind of a North Star in this work. And that is the concept of the pacing problem. I read about this years ago, developed by ASU researcher Gary Marcus and his collaborators in the physical sciences, the idea that technology changes usually exponentially and policy changes linearly at best, which means that every year there is a bigger gap between how technology is changing our societies and what is possible, and how our political institutions keep up with that change. And so it's the Red Queen problem. You have to run faster to stay even at the same place you were before, and run even faster if you want to try to attempt to catch up. With regards to Congress and legislatures broadly, I flagged that there are actually three pacing problems. So that includes the external pacing problem. This is the one we think about a lot. Do lawmakers understand how technology is changing? Are they able to keep up with their regulatory duties? Do they are they able to ask good questions in hearings and make laws that keep pace with how quickly things are changing? There are some reasons that external pacing problem is exacerbated in the US. That's what's listed there. And again, Red Queen problem. We have to continue to invest resources just to keep up. But there's also an interbranch pacing problem in the US, which is that Congress often gives the executive branch lots of resources to develop technologies, to create rules, to bring in experts, to hire people, and doesn't give itself similar authority, resources, or tools. So you have this imbalance between the executive branch and the legislative branch, that has the duty to oversee the executive branch. So balancing the resources available to both branches is important to addressing the interbranch pacing problem. And then the internal pacing problem, which is where I think we really get to this question of where does AI in the lawmaking workflow begin to make a big difference? And that is the internal pacing problem is the notion that legislatures often don't use modern tools or processes in their own work. And that leads to you have a much better workflow on your personal computer at home than you do in the congressional office, where you're trying to respond to constituents and parse massive bills and write summaries and stay abreast of all that's happening in the world. So that's the internal pacing problem. So that's the reason that we at Popbox Foundation care so much about this work. The good news in the US is that modernization has been moving along. I know lots of folks on the call have been working on this, but just to flag, there was a bipartisan House Select Committee on Modernization from 2019 to 2022. It produced 202 recommendations that are gradually being implemented. And now that work has moved over into a new subcommittee on modernization in the Committee on House Administration, which is leading the work in the House on how the institution will use AI in its own work. My slides are not advanced. There we go. COVID was actually a catalyst for a lot of modernization changes and adoption of new technologies. And this is just flagging the report from the Select Committee on Modernization that came out in December of 2022. So not terribly long ago, and just about before GPT-3 bounded onto the scene to change things. But you'll notice there were very few mentions. There was only one mention of AI in that report. So what that illustrates, I think, is how much modernization is a moving target. It's not a destination to be reached. It's something that we have to keep working towards, which means understanding these new technologies and how they will be incorporated into the work. So as I mentioned, the work continues in the House with this new modernization subcommittee chaired by Stephanie Bice of Oklahoma, equal number of Republicans and Democrats. And again, they are leading the way on AI adoption in the House of Representatives. But we at PopVox Foundation and our colleagues in civil society, we are kind of rapid response when it comes to new challenges or technologies. You know, for example, we were beating the drum very early about Congress needing to go remote before the pandemic, along with friends like Lorelei Kelly, who I know is on the call. And when Gen AI became a new emergent technology that many were trying to become familiar with, we co-wrote a piece for Tech Policy Press, flagging the issue. We held one of the first briefings on the Hill back in April of 2023, brought in some great speakers for a variety of staff roundtables, and just began following how members were gradually starting to incorporate and introduce AI into their workflows, and the warnings that were coming from experts like Nathan Sanders and Bruce Schneier about how AI would potentially transform the lawmaking process. In January of 2024, my colleague Aubrey Wilson and I released this report on representative bodies in the AI era. We called it a volume 1 because we knew as soon as we put it out, it would be obsolete, or at least there would be lots of other things that we weren't able to cover that needed to be in another report. So we're currently working on volume 2. But the one thing I would flag from this report is that there's a pretty cool timeline in there of the gradual adoption of AI in the U.S. federal legislative branch over the years, and there are some highlights, a few state highlights there too. And what we flag in the report is Congress has been using AI or automated technologies that one could put in an AI category for quite some time, including predictive modeling that is kind of the underlying technology for modeling in places like the Congressional Budget Office, the Joint Tax Committee, machine learning. So this is an example of a simulation tool that GAO's Innovation Lab developed to demonstrate how identity requirements affect the uptake and access to various programs. Natural language processing. This is a video of the comparative print suite, which the House of Representatives Office of the Clerk developed to help members of Congress and staff compare potential bill changes, like how an amendment would change existing law. And so this is live and accessible to House staff. We're hoping one of these days accessible to Senate staff and maybe even the public. And GAO's Innovation Lab has been a leader in adopting these new technologies and showing what's possible, including now, these were some of their earlier innovations. Now GAO has launched Project Galileo, which is an internal LLM that leverages Anthropic Claude API to access GAO reports and allows them to run internal queries. You have speech recognition being used in parliaments around the world. I know Brazil and others are leading with live transcripts. And so back in April of 2023, we at PopVox Foundation made some recommendations about what we thought should happen over the next few years with this rapidly changing technology, with especially as generative AI was introduced. And what we've seen is that many of our recommendations have happened. So early experimentation and enabling House staff to experiment, learning from other industries and legislatures around the world, monitoring changes in advocacy practices and kind of keeping an eye on how the volume of advocacy correspondence, including fake phone calls and massively increased generation of not form letters, things that used to be form letters that are now a little bit more customized due to the use of AI, kind of keeping track of this. but also the relevant committees holding relevant hearings and commissioning studies and learning from the private sector. This is all happening. There have been a large number of hearings in both the House and Senate on AI more broadly, that external pacing problem, but also related to the internal pacing problem. The Senate Rules Committee has held a hearing on legislative branch use of AI, and the Committee on House Administration is just leading the way through releasing public reports on how the legislative branch is currently leveraging AI, potential use cases, bringing in experts, et cetera. So it really is impressive. As one of the experts we brought in said, this technology is so new and Congress is not late yet. And I think with the proactive steps that are being taken, they're not late at all. We're all learning. So some of the recommendations we made for medium term and long term, are investment in modern technological systems, upskilling, multidisciplinary teams, and then that longer term, just flagging that we know that there's the potential that these technologies are going to fundamentally change the way we do things. So the House and now the Senate too has launched, has issued guidance for internal staff use. I always think it's helpful to flag this study that shows the increase in productivity. This was from consultants, I think at Boston Consulting, that, and the increase in productivity for people who use Chat GPT versus the consultants that didn't, because I think that, a consultant's workflow is very similar to a congressional staffer's workflow. It's drafting memos, it's holding meetings, it's synthesizing information. So, and this was, from the very early Chat GPT basic version, just to see that kind of productivity increase, it is helpful in lessons for legislative staff. I really appreciate this perspective from Alberto Mancarelli in the Italian Chamber of Deputies, who emphasizes that law is words, government is words. So large language models are if there is any area in which they are potentially helpful, law is a good candidate and in our legislative branch. So it makes a lot of sense that we begin experimenting. So some of our immediate use cases, the way that we are already seeing these tools, be deployed in the legislative branch is in summarizing text, in transcribing meetings, in handling public requests, in language translation. You are all probably familiar with these use cases and experimenting with them in your own environments. And then the question, and I always include this. This is from my colleague, Daniel Schumann. He also points out that these are very helpful for coming up with clever acronyms for your bill name and other uses. But, it's not all rosy. So, for example, with legislative drafting, we don't currently have expert systems that can leverage AI to draft bills. We have commercial solutions drafting bills that then need very intense scrutiny from real lawyers who have that duty of care to the members that they work with to make sure that the policy actually does what the member intends. And there's a weird moment right now where you have, I think in legislatures around the world, but certainly anecdotally in the US Congress, you have staffers using Chat GPT to draft a bill and bringing it to the Legislative Counsel office and saying, okay, I drafted a bill, just give it a quick look and let me know it's good to go. And these lawyers, still have to do the same work that they did before. And so the fact that it becomes easier to draft a policy, but the work that is still required to review that policy hasn't changed so much, is creating kind of a discrepancy of expectation and potentially a misalignment of resources. So these are the kinds of things that really have to be considered. Again, I flagged that the House is putting out public reports, holding hearings. And when we think about the future of lawmaking and where AI fits into the legislative process, I think we probably all intuitively understand that you start with the low risk pieces first. We kind of talk about it as a really competent intern, a competent and confident intern that you still have to check their work. So speeches and letter drafts and things like that. That's where we are now. We're starting to see ways that these LLMs can be incorporated into tasks like casework or issue research. They're going to need to be more specialized. So we're going to need to go beyond the commercial tools to different implementations that potentially leverage legislative branch data resources, whether that's using a commercial model to access those resources or even an open source model that becomes more that is adopted by the institution and trained internally. Using the high quality taxpayer funded neutral information that is produced by the experts in the legislative branch is where we will go next. And then the next stages is where we get to what I think is really exciting and transformational. More extensive policy modeling, the presentation of policy options, the ability for programs as they're implemented to make data more readily available so that you can have oversight in, if not real time, in near time, to allow for more responsive policy. So just different levels of AI implementation from what we have now, which is from the older big contractor natural language processing apps like the comparative print that have been built to now using commercial off-the-shelf software that has generative AI in it, like Airtable now has AI in it, and some offices are using that, to third-party generative AI. So, using Anthropic Claude, using ChatGPT for tasks within a congressional office, to the next stage of building custom apps using perhaps retrieval augmented generation, allowing those within the legislative branch to access their own data with the assistance of an LLM tool that has access to those data, and even potentially down the road, actually seeing legislatures train their own models, probably starting with an open source model and then fine tuning. And at the Congressional Hackathon this year, AI was all the talk. It definitely is making its way into the halls. We at PopVox Foundation, along with our friends and other civil society organizations, are holding lots of trainings and trying to help offices leverage this technology and stay within the current guidance. And we're thinking about what's next. So as I mentioned, we're working on volume 2. We would love to interview those of you who are already deploying AI in legislatures around the world and kind of hear how things are going. And we are thinking about volume 2 with my lovely Dolly produced image in the context of augmenting, automating, and transforming. So I think where we are now in AI use within the legislative process is that it's augmenting existing systems. It's helping you draft a letter. It's helping you draft a speech. There will soon be ways in which we better integrate these technologies into our systems to automate certain tasks responsibly, with proper levels of oversight and discretion. And eventually we get to transformation, to implementation within legislative branch workflows that actually enable us to do things that were not possible before with just humans. We will do things differently because we have these tools, more dynamic, responsive lawmaking. I get excited about the potential for modeling different policy options or for visualizing policy results in real time. This is my dream implementation. Some of my friends we've talked about this before, outcomes driven policies. So Beth and I both entered, I think, the tech and government space through public engagement. And there is a real question about where in the lawmaking process, where in the policymaking process does public engagement belong? And I tend to think that it belongs at the very high level at setting goals. And then there is a a need to have data and evidence applied to the ways in which we go about meeting those goals. And then at the local level, the ability to have lots of discretion as policies are implemented so that people can participate to share how different policies impact their communities, what their priorities are, what their concerns are, what their ideas are, et cetera. So smaller, closer public input processes at the local level. And again, this all becomes much more possible when you're leveraging AI and data to be able to compare different implementations. What's working in one place? How can we learn from it? Where do we need to intervene and step in to make sure that policies are meeting the goals set at the outset? So that's my vision of where we are eventually going with the future of lawmaking, leveraging AI and lots of smart people and public participation and data and evidence and all the things. So I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much. Just a reminder to folks who have questions for you to please use the Q&A button at the bottom so we can help to organize them, even if we end up calling on you. I want to second Dan's applause for you, and maybe let me get us started with a couple of questions, and then we'll give people a chance to add theirs in the chat, in the Q&A, excuse me, and indicate that they would like to be heard. So first, let me ask you the sort of very big question, is what are the problems of lawmaking? What are the challenges to our democracy? And we know they are myriad. When we hear talk of Congress, I mean, there is a long list, from the scandals to the lack of productivity, to the lack of staffing, the least productive Congress in history, the time spent on lobbying, the dialing for dollars, the institutionalized corruption. I could keep going, but we'll run out of time if all we did was make a laundry list of all the problems. From your perspective, what are the challenges of democracy and the institutional challenges that we can begin to solve, or to which AI is potentially a solution? And which problems do we not address with AI? Do we not fix? Lot of proposals out there for congressional reforms of all kinds. Why are you spending your time on this?
Oh, wow, what a question. I'm glad you started with an easy one, Beth. So I mean, the reason that we are spending our time on this is really that pacing problem. So I live in Silicon Valley. There's a lot of people who talk about existential risk. And to me, the most concerning existential risk is if government doesn't move ahead at sufficient pace to remain relevant as the world changes so quickly over the next few decades. And I mean, to be very honest, like I see this with the tech companies that are out there running their own quote unquote little d democratic processes. You could say that's a failure of government. The fact that these tech companies feel that our existing democratic systems are not sufficient for them to be properly regulated within a democratic system that exists as a government, and they need to go out and do their own little democratic processes in order to have perceived legitimacy. Government's not filling that gap right now. But I do think that there is massive need for government to step up. Like that is just not an acceptable state of affairs. It is not acceptable for little d democracy to be an external private process. We have social contracts and came together to form governments long ago because that is the way that we, the people, exercise power, rather than just petition the king to say, pretty please, would you not violate my rights? So government has a vital, important role to play in that pacing problem. To me, is existential in that way. But I do think that there really is an opportunity for government to step up. I mean, the amazing thing about exponential technologies is when there is greater capacity within these institutions and modern tools within these institutions, they can catch up really quickly. And so the ability to process and absorb mountains of information that used to, I mean, all of us have probably suffered through, the nightmare of PDFs that were not machine readable. And that used to be such a frustrating thing. And, now I was just talking today with our CTO, who's, chunking a batch of CRS reports and using PDFs because they're easier to keep the page number straight. And those will all soon be searchable by with a chat interface. So I think the ability to have stage level improvements over the next several years is really exciting. As far as the myriad issues with our various governing institutions around the world, it is the case, I think, that some of our older systems are a bit brittle. They have not been updated in ways that are responsive to the ways in which we expect to get information today. We expect to engage. The responsiveness that we expect, and even the situational awareness we expect. Like, I would really like to see a congressional, the either the hearing room or the lobby of the hearing room with lots of dashboards and screens, so that when you are having a hearing about a topic, you're also seeing live data about how that program is impacting various parts of the country, and different policy interventions and what would be expected with those various changes. We're at the point now where all of that is technically possible, actually. If we can standardize our data and reduce some silos and build some tools and open things up, the technology is not the issue. It's do these institutions invest in themselves? Do they create the ways for this side of the house to talk to this side of the house, to talk to this agency, to talk to this expert? It's really just a matter of putting the pieces together now. It's not a matter of whether it's technically possible. So I am optimistic that we can. First, we have to imagine what's technically possible and why we think we'd like to do that. And then I think there are some pretty willing people within the institution that are willing to take baby steps at first and then bigger steps later towards making that possible.
So there surely have been and continue to be pioneering people in the institution. I'm thinking here
Yes.
very much, and you mentioned the Modernization Committee. Congressman Kilmer obviously used to lead that committee. Now there's been a change of leadership, but his team in particular has been truly kind of pioneering in terms of pushing the adoption of modern technologies. And I think more importantly, focusing that question on the improvement of the institution itself. So that's the starting point for the question here. So much of the conversation about AI, both in the media as well as in Congress itself, is about what I might think of as the external conversation. How is AI getting used in society? How are we regulating these technologies? What will its impact be on the economy? What are you seeing as being the drivers, or what can create the drivers for more of that internal focus on fixing the institutions? Again, something we've not done on the legislative side or on the executive side, where we just don't have that R&D lens about our own institutions in the way that other governments do.
Yeah. Well, again, I mean, not to come back to the select committee and the modernization subcommittee on absolutely every question, but that in itself was an innovation. Setting up even a place within the institution where these questions could be asked, or where good ideas could be brought, or where experts could, come together and share information, or House offices could be asked questions about how quickly this is being implemented, or what do you need to make this happen. That just really didn't exist before. And I know because, I was a staffer back in 2000, 2008 to 2010, with an idea of, a way that people should be able to write to their lawmaker and see all the bills, and organizations should be able to upload their positions. And I tried to find somebody to take that idea to. And what I found at that time in 2010 is, if I had had an idea about how to improve the physical structure of of the Congress, I could have gone to the architect of the Capitol. But anything about the digital structure of Congress, that just didn't exist. The kind of institutional document, like that just didn't exist at the time, but it does exist now. So, you know, the House has a digital services there. So that infrastructure is essential for what comes next. And I actually really appreciate Dan's question about how to prepare for the next 10 years. And I think this is how we prepare for the next 10 years. We even saw this during COVID. And Beth, you were a part of like our crazy time during COVID where we were trying to, you know, help members and staffers understand that like going remote is both something's going to have to happen during this time, and it's not actually that scary. But being ready to then activate and, you know, get laptops out to everybody and establish rules for how it was going to work. And if the modernization committee had not existed at that time and the various, you know, modernization efforts underway at that time, that would have been a much rockier process. So we even saw the resilience and agility that those earlier efforts made possible during COVID when it was time to really accelerate and respond to a crisis. And I think that AI right now is a similar accelerant, and I think that the institution is responding in a similar way because those muscles, you know, while they could always be stronger, they exist now. And so I'm optimistic that that underlying infrastructure of even the people who need to be involved in a decision about new processes or new technologies or new tools, knowing each other and trusting each other and having the experience of having worked together on other things. I think that's how we prepare for the next 10 years, because we don't know what's coming in the next 10 years, but being able to move more quickly, being able to talk to experts, being able to try things and not go through some kind of 5-year procurement process for a, you know, a new technology, having in-house capacity, those are all what make us ready.
So Congress is has this now wonderful chief administrative office, but is at the same time very decentralized in how it works. And one of the things we've heard, for example, in a recent modernization subcommittee hearing was, and has been, and is something you talk about in the report, is how the chief administrative officer actually gave out licenses to ChatGPT to 150 or so users, created a subcommittee, not a subcommittee, sort of task force, if you will, of 200.
The working group, yeah.
Working group, that's the word I'm looking for. Thank you. To give feedback on their uses. So there's a lot of push on the one hand on sort of what I might call individual office use. So how are individual staff members using AI to improve productivity in their day-to-day? On the other hand, there's a set of projects you alluded to tantalizingly in your slides that I hope you might say another word about, that are being driven by some of the support agencies in particular, whether it's through a Congressional Research Service, the Library of Congress, the GAO, and other places, as well as the CAO's office, the administrative office, really trying to think about institutionally, what do we need? So I'm just trying to understand whether you see the opportunities here, or let me see whether you see the greatest momentum is going to be in those individual uses and users, or is it going to be more on the institutional uses, and which one, and if so, why?
So I think it has to be both, just because of the nature of Congress. And again, this is this is the U.S. context. I know there's lots of folks on here from other countries that are implementing in other ways, and in some cases have the ability to do more institution-wide projects to begin with. But you know, the cliche is that Congress is 541 small businesses, and they all have their own policies and priorities, and that really is the case. It is very difficult for anybody in Congress, any office or organization in Congress, to tell anybody else what to do. It is just constitutional. You can't order them to do a thing. You can incentivize them to do a thing, but you can't tell them, you know, there's nobody with the ultimate authority to tell them to do a thing. So our approach from the outside has been really to encourage experimentation and to encourage the House institutionally to not be overly restrictive on the front end with these new technologies. Even though we understand there is risk, even though we understand they are not perfect, but that opening up for experimentation with guidance, with training, with tips and proper warnings is a way to help, the individual staffer and member start to better understand what we're dealing with here. I mean, we all have had that mind-blowing moment where we're using one of these tools for something and they get you better than, a colleague you were trying to explain it to. It's that mind-blowing moment is something you have to get before you even understand what the capabilities are. But then over in support offices, especially, I would say, GAO's Innovation Lab is just a shining light because they are able to experiment. Now, they're a little cautious. They don't release it very broadly because GAO really likes to be perfect. And as you know, with experimental technology, it's rarely perfect. But they really have the capability, the technical expertise, et cetera, to really jump in and try things. So the fact that they were so early in setting up a RAG system, so retrieval augmented generation, where basically you are, taking a corpus of work, in this case, all the GAO reports, and using a commercial large language models API to go and search through that content to produce an answer. That's really innovative. And for them to be able to do that and then demonstrate to the members of Congress and committees of jurisdiction and even other support agencies that that's possible, that you can have a system like that that is dealing with more trusted information than, say, everything on the internet, and Reddit for the past 20 years, that begins to create confidence, and I think makes the case for more investment, more experimentation, that then again can show where these technologies can begin to augment existing processes, potentially begin to automate some of those processes, and down the road eventually to transform some of it.
So you have some questions coming in the chat, which I want to weave into the conversation here. So apropos of other countries, João Lima is here from Brazil, who's one of the pioneers in the use of AI in the Brazilian legislature. And I know he doesn't want to call on me to call on him, but so I will just try to relay his question here, and I'll invite you, all of you, to take a look at it in the. I'm not sure everybody can see the Q&A, so maybe let me read it. He says, today with generative AI, we can do much more than we could do 2 years ago with predictive AI. Considering recent advances in generative AI and GPU hardware, I believe that in 2 years, we'd be able to do much more than we can do today. On the pyramid slide that you showed us about AI applications, I think that the different levels of the pyramid should not be organized as maturity levels. They should not be hierarchical. For example, I believe it's not an exaggeration to imagine that within a 2-year horizon, a legislative assistant who is listening to the discussion in a meeting room, like committees or a plenary meeting, it can play several roles, whether reactively answering questions or obtaining data, or actively proposing referrals, evaluating risks, even if the other applications have not yet been implemented by the institution. Sorry, I thought it was worth sort of trying to relay all that detail there. He's eager for your reaction to that and to his objection to your hierarchical organization.
Well, I appreciate it tremendously. And we'll just say, I mean, we have learned so much from Brazil and continue to learn so much from Brazil. So however he thinks it should be organized, I will pretty much defer. But I think that's really accurate, that adoption will potentially come with some innovators and early adopters in different roles. So potentially the hypothetical legislative assistant that he's discussing there, who might within their office, or even through other means, adopt different tools that the institution itself may not be leading on. I've been really fascinated by this trend in startups that has several companies are launching as like the CFO company, or the scheduler company, or basically each of these companies is focused on a vertical task, and providing AI to do this vertical job very, very, very well. And I think that there is the potential to think about some of the jobs in a legislative workflow as things that themselves could be really optimized through some of these tools and built in a way that then could be customized by the various offices for the preferences of the member, or certain parameters and things like that, but could begin to really augment specific tasks. And this is kind of over in the transformation bucket, but I agree with Xiao that 2 years is probably a good timeline for some of these transformational deployments to be on our horizon.
The mute button, still so hard to find. So I wanted to ask you though, you've mentioned that there are a lot of these tools being built that we're never going to see, or at least not seeing right now, because there's such an emphasis on perfection, getting it right. There's a lot of tech being built from the ground up instead of using ChatGPT or even Claude or something else, because again, perfection is sought. That's one reason driving some of the kind of reticence. But I also want to ask you about the sort of who's driving the ship. We've obviously had pressure from modernization. You've had leaders like Kilmer who have pushed for it. You had the creation of this, but you have a lot of this innovation happening in other places, in these support agencies. So I'm just kind of, the challenge I want to ask you is like, how are we going to have a strategy? How are we going to accelerate this improvement when there is no one really driving the ship? There is no one voice sort of saying, these are the priorities for what we're going to build first and what we're going to build second. So there are working groups, there are interagency groups, there's lots of discussion. But there's things that, for example, the Modernization Committee has been asking for quite some time, and they're not getting done. Again, some are, others aren't. But so I want to put to you, am I correct in my assumption, or would you disagree with me? Or do you think there is a way that we can accelerate adoption of innovation?
So yes, definitely a way we can accelerate adoption of innovation. I will flag again, with the House of Representatives in particular, there is a point person, which I think is new for, this kind of it's all new, but I think this is admirable for this particular issue, and that is that a detail lead from GAO was actually became a part of the Committee on House Administration staff in July of 2023 to lead the House efforts on AI. To my knowledge, this has never happened before, that a single point of contact within a committee of jurisdiction was given the task of convening members who had expressed an interest in AI and talking to the support agencies and talking to staff and just, starting to collect information on needs and fears and, new technologies to, be a hub of information. And it just cannot be overstated how important that has been. I wish the Senate would do something similar. But also, I think the cycle, again, at least within the US Congress, for how things get done is always an outside inside strategy. My field when I was a staffer was health, tax, and trade. And yes, some good ideas initiated internally, but we got the pressure from outside and we got the reports from outside, and we heard, about new ideas and needs and things like that from the outside. And then we metabolized them and we talked to internal experts and, brought it through the process within. And this, this civil society world of which, we are a part, that brings together also academia, also, groups who are working on public participation, civic engagement, experts like Federation for American Scientists who want to make sure evidence and data are incorporated into policy, the Data Foundation, lots of groups that are really good at raising issues and pushing forward their particular priorities, it's essential. And so I think it's a really interesting time, because I think we are really called upon more than ever before to think about how we would really like it to work, to think about a big vision, which we don't often all come together and do. But thinking about both inside and outside folks, thinking about how this could work, should work, and what are the big questions that should be asked along the way, that needs to be an ongoing conversation, an ongoing, very transparent, very humble conversation that continues even as as majorities and minorities change, as people come and go, as staffers are inside or then they're outside, that kind of ongoing conversation.
You have another question in the chat from Will Clark at the National Center for Strengthening Legislatures, if I have the acronym correct in my head, where he asks, to what extent do you think the governments will be integrating use of AI into their processes using off-the-shelf software versus custom general AI applications versus in-house development using open source models? So how is this tech going to get built? I alluded to a little bit some of this before, and whether you think there will be a movement towards, I will just add to this, more experimentation using off-the-shelf tools, or this desire to get it perfect, and therefore we're going to build ground up using our own data scientists.
Yeah, it's a great question. And also, we learned so much from the States and from NCSL. So, Will, thank you for the question. And also, thank you for all the information that you guys share. I do think that it is a little bit of a continuum. So, right now, there is off-the-shelf technology that legislatures, that have approved for use in offices, Microsoft 365, Airtable, all of these various things. And these this software, they are gradually incorporating AI tools into this software. I guess it's a question of whether the legislatures are going to go back and relook at these cloud services to see if they continue to be approved now that they are incorporating AI into them. But I think that's really the first way that we see this technology kind of make its way into offices that honestly don't even know that they're using it. It's just like, oh, look, it's becoming very intuitive. I think the use of commercial tools, which is what we're seeing, increasingly in House and Senate as staffers, use a chat GPT or some other service to draft a press release or whatever. I think that's kind of next. But I also think we're all seeing the limitations of that. Even as chat windows grow and we can, actually put it in a document and tell it to reference the document, that's imperfect. And also we know that those commercial uses, that those kind of first tier commercial uses, also use whatever's entered into that chat window to train their model. So that opens up more of a privacy security shenanigans concern, I think, for legislatures that they would rather not intersect with. And so it means that actually building for the institutions where you're leveraging an API, and usually the API from Claude or from OpenAI or others, the terms of service are different with the API. They don't use your query to change the model when you're using the API. And if you add it to a retrieval augmented generation system like GAO is using, then you're able to query your own data. And I think that is the next sweet spot. It's going to take some internal resources. I think we may see some contractors working with states or local governments to help with their own deployments of services like this, or even bespoke tools that I'm sure lots of folks are trying to sell that service right now. But I think that's going to make a lot of sense. And then the question of taking open source tools and fine tuning them within the institution, I think, except for, the most advanced legislatures, that is probably a few years out.
So we like to focus here on all the positive things we can be doing. But I would be remiss if I didn't ask you if you aren't worried about the ways in which AI isn't already and won't increasingly make it challenging for, even more challenging for legislators and their staffs to do their job. In other words, we've seen the deluge that people are under from communication just in the days of fax, email, letters, and social media. Now, when you add in AI, you've got bots potentially deluging offices of members. There's potential, obviously, to use AI to be more responsive, but are we not going to just have bots talking to bots? Or what can we do to actually increase engagement in meaningful ways?
That's the perfect setup for our project together, Beth. So Beth and I and our teams have been talking for a while about, this potential that we all see coming of, LLM generated constituent correspondence, and now offices reply to it using LLM assisted tools. So basically, you got robots talking to robots, and what's the point of all this anyway? Uh, from years of experience on constituent correspondence, I think that the system of congressional mail and advocacy comments was already broken, and I'm just glad it's going to be good and broken now, so that we can all work on what comes next. And so with GovLab, we at Potbox Foundation are undertaking a new project called Future of Constituent Engagement that really goes back to first principles, looking at what does the congressional office want to get out of this interaction? What does a constituent want to get out of the interaction? How do they want to feel? What information makes them more informed? What information are they trying to convey, and what is the good experience? And I think out of that, long-term study that we're going to start working on, I think there will be some technical solutions. Beth mentioned our work with students at the Burns Center, who built what I think is the first congressional office chatbot prototype for Seth Moulton's office. It was fantastic. So there may be some specialized chatbots that are very carefully designed to make sure that people know who they're interacting with and where the information comes from, and proper guardrails, et cetera. But I also think part of the finding is going to be that, some of the best constituent engagement is when the member of Congress buys pizza and hangs out at the local library, and you have childcare so that people can be there and actually talk about their concerns. So I do think that there are some really exciting tech solutions in the future, and I think there are some really important non-tech solutions that we need to make sure receive proper resources, and that we use tech to free up people's time so they can go and be a part of that.
Marcy, thank you so much. What I'm going to do is ask our team to put some info for those who have to leave spot on 6, to put some information about upcoming talks in the chat, which we will do. For those who are listening via other mechanisms and not joining us on Zoom, but watching this streaming, let me just let you know that we have several talks coming up, including a conversation on April 11th at 5 p.m. with Urbanist AI, talking about AI and urban planning and the ways that they're doing that with citizens using AI. We will also be having a talk as part of this series with Audrey Tang on April 5th at noon. The digital minister of Taiwan, talking about AI and some of her work around engagement. And then we'll put information about a few other talks in the chat. So for those who have to leave a spot on 6, I want to thank you for joining us. And I'm going to just close us out. I think with seeing if we have any final questions. Dan has put one in the chat, and I'll invite any others that people want to give, and we'll keep going a couple more minutes, and then let people to their dinners, lunches, and to go to bed, whatever time zone people are in. So Dan Jackson, New Law Lab, again, our collaborator, but also a very fine user of technology to improve legal systems. He asked the question, he says he wants to put a finer point on the question that he asked you earlier about superintelligence. And he says, we know that computer scientists are doing alignment or super alignment. And we know what the executive branch, that is the Biden executive order, for example, the White House executive order, is doing for the executive branch. But what should legislative bodies, as operational components of government, do now to prepare for the time when AI is smarter than we are? So he is asking not about the productivity today, but the robot take over tomorrow? And what do legislatures need to do to prepare for that?
I love Dan and I love Dan's question. I do think that we are going to need AI systems to understand AI systems. Like within government are going to need tools at the same level as the tools that are being deployed um, uh, in other areas of society in order to understand how they are working and to conduct oversight and to make responsive laws. And even I think the legislative process itself is going to have to accelerate. Our current cadence is not sufficient for the speed at which society is going to change, and the legislature is going to have to respond. I could go down a whole rabbit hole on the Supreme Court decision that's probably coming out in June that may soon even change some of the deference that the U.S. courts give to agency decision making and put a lot more responsibility on the legislative branch in the U.S. Congress. The capacity needed to maintain pace and understand what's going on with those kinds of accelerating changes over the next decade, as Dan mentioned, is there are not enough people to throw at the problem. The technology is essential. And this is, again, where I come back to the existential risk. If government doesn't invest in this, if the legislative branch doesn't invest in this, it will become irrelevant. It will not be sufficiently informed or responsive to be relevant to what's happening in society. So, again, I think we can't absolutely know what those tools are that are going to be needed in 10 years, but keeping pace with what the state of the art is today and preparing to keep pace with what the state of the art is next year and the next year and the next year and the next year, having these agile systems that can continue to improve themselves and having internal institutional bodies that can ask the questions, that can oversee, that can invest in these resources, and that can push somewhat slow-moving institutions to keep innovating even when it's uncomfortable, that is going to be essential.
Well, we have a lot to work on, and we're very grateful to you for the work that you are doing to push us towards that faster future. We're looking forward to volume 2 of the report. No rest for the weary. And for all that you're doing to help, again, accelerate modernization and increase the focus on what we can do to improve the People's House and this most important institution of our democracy. We need it now more than ever. Thank you to all of you for joining us and for your questions. Much appreciated. And we hope you'll come back and join us again on April 5th for Audrey Tang, or April 11th for Urbanist AI. Very cool stuff. And we are looking forward to more hopeful conversations, so ways in which we can strengthen democracy in the age of AI. Thank you, Marcy, and thanks to all of you.
Thanks so much. Good to